Dan Bilzerian is right now broke and homeless. Dan Bilzerian got exposed. Dan Bilzerian getting arrested.
Imagine a man who built a global empire on a foundation of lies, a life of military bravado and poker fortunes that never actually happened. This is not a movie plot. It's the complete downfall of Dan Bilzerian, a man who became a king in a kingdom built on sand only to watch it all wash away with the tide of truth. If you were to have a sex change surgery, would you let the homies smash or let them starve of coochie? Let me know in the comments below. What do you do when you want to build a persona of a self-made man with immense wealth? For Dan Bilzerian, the answer was to tell two huge interconnected lies. First, he claimed to be a tough guy, a former Navy SEAL who had survived 500 days of grueling training, a detail that conveniently left out the part where he was kicked out and never actually earned the trident. Second, he concocted a wild story about a poker genius who turned his last bit of money into a $100 million fortune in secret, high-stakes games. This myth served as a perfect explanation for his wealth and allowed him to present himself as a lone wolf who earned every supercar and private jet. The only problem is that not one professional in the poker world believes this story, as the details were always fuzzy and his supposed opponents were always anonymous. It was the perfect shield to protect him from the simple truth. He was just another trust fund kid. If this video made your butt tickle, even just a little, please consider subscribing. It really helps the channel and helps me tickle your butt too. If this video gets 7 likes, I will think about letting 7 children from my basement escape. Here's the comment of the day. Shout out to @Alice at the lake. I'm not sure how true that is, but I thought that shit was funny. Okay, let's get back to the video. So, if the poker money wasn't real, where did the first bit of cash come from? To understand that, you have to meet the man behind the scenes, the puppet master himself, Paul Bilzerian, Dan's father. While Dan was creating his story of being a tough guy who was cut off, he was hiding that his dad is a convicted corporate criminal and, from what everyone says, a master of financial tricks. Paul Bilzerian was a famous Wall Street shark in the 1980s. He was found guilty of securities fraud and tax evasion, was in prison for about a year, and was ordered by the SEC to pay a massive $62 million fine. Here's the crazy part. In the 30 years since, he's only paid back a tiny bit of it while saying he's completely broke. This is from a guy who spent 20 years living in a 28,000 square 50 mega mansion in Florida. The apple, it seems, didn't fall far from the scammer tree. For years, Dan Bilzerian told the world a story of independence, claiming his parents cut him off and that he made his own way. He used this narrative to justify his actions, famously saying that since he didn't rely on his family for money, he didn't have to conform to their rules. But the truth is, a significant portion of his wealth came from a trust fund set up by his father. It was a classic case of inherited wealth disguised as self-made success. Bilzerian was not a kid with no resources. He was a child of immense privilege who learned the art of financial manipulation and deception from a young age, with his father acting as his guide and consultant. This early foundation of hidden money and a deceptive backstory was the perfect breeding ground for the larger lies that would define his public life. Dan Bilzerian's tough guy persona wasn't just a poker story. It was an entire lifestyle built around military gear and bravado. This obsession with guns and explosives, however, was not without real-world consequences. In 2014, Bilzerian was arrested at a Las Vegas airport on federal charges of possessing bomb-making materials. While the charges were later dismissed in a plea deal, the incident exposed another crack in his carefully curated image. This wasn't some action movie star. This was a man whose antics were attracting the attention of federal agents. It painted a much messier, legally complicated picture of a man who was playing a dangerous game both in his personal life and in his business ventures. The king of Instagram was never a king. He was a character paid for by a scam company supported by hired models living in a rented castle. The first major crack in Bilzerian's carefully constructed empire appeared in 2020. The former president of his company, Ignite, a man named Curtis Heffernan, was fired. He decided to fire back with a lawsuit that used a legal flamethrower to burn down Dan's carefully built image. The court papers were full of truth, showing the rotten foundation of Bilzerian's empire. That famous huge $65 million mansion in the Hollywood Hills where everything supposedly happened, he didn't own it. It was a rental that was costing his company, not him, an insane $200,000 every single month. The lawsuit kept going. It claimed that the endless supply of beautiful women in every photo weren't just fans who loved him. They were often hired models and influencers. Their time was carefully planned and paid for by Ignite and listed as an expense, like image promotion. This wasn't a business. It was a personal ATM. Ignite wasn't a business, it was Dan Bilzerian's personal piggy bank and adult playground. Investor money was being burned on the most ridiculous personal toys, all hilariously claimed as business expenses. We're talking about $75,000 for a custom paintball field, because nothing says global cannabis brand like shooting your friends with paint. A $40,000 rock climbing wall, a very important tool for selling vape pens. Of course, a $500,000 yacht rental, even a $15,000 bed frame. The king wasn't just a fake, he was using other people's money to pay for his fantasy. legacy. The lawsuit showed a company that existed for one purpose only: to fund Dan Bilzerian's lavish and extravagant lifestyle while making it seem like he was some kind of business genius. As you can guess, a company whose main business was paying for Instagram photos was financially a complete and total dumpster fire. In 2019 alone, Ignite managed to lose nearly $70 million while barely making any real money. The stock price, which was once held up by pure hype, crashed by over 90%, becoming pretty much worthless. Backed into a corner, Dan went on Twitter and gave what might be the single dumbest defense in business history. He compared Ignite to Uber, saying, "Uber lost $5 billion in a quarter. You know what I mean? Like, some companies lose money. Most companies lose money when they start. This is a special kind of stupid. Yes, Dan, Uber loses money, but they're a massive global tech company building an actual service. They aren't spending investor money on a $31,000 set of Star Wars guns." Just when everyone thought Ignite was dead, the company announced its first ever profitable quarter in late 2020. The stock price jumped over 150%. Had Dan done it? Had the genius finally proven all the haters wrong? No, of course not. The SEC later filed a lawsuit against Ignite and Paul Bilzerian, claiming the whole profitable quarter was a fake. They said Ignite had cooked the books, reporting millions in fake sales from a huge deal of vape pens that, according to the company that supposedly bought them, never even happened. They just made it all up. After a while, the act became impossible to keep up. Quietly, with no explanation, Dan took Ignite off the stock exchange. It was the final silent confession that the whole thing was a failure. So, the company has officially blown up. It's a confirmed dumpster fire. And by the way, if you enjoy watching these kinds of empires built on lies get completely exposed like this is probably a good time to hit that subscribe button. We cover this stuff all the time. And trust me, you're gonna want to hear what he does next. So, what do you do when your company blows up, your reputation is ruined, and the family money is being investigated by the government? If you're Dan Bilzerian, you switch to the most predictable scam you can think of. You become a dating coach. Welcome to the Sigma Society, Dan's newest project, where he, for a lot of money, will teach you the secrets to attracting women. The irony is so thick, it's not even funny. The man whose entire love life was paid for by huge wealth and a fake image is now selling courses on how to get girls without needing looks or money. And this brings us to the final, most pathetic part of this whole story. As the SEC got closer to his father for the alleged scam at Ignite, Dan did something that can only be described as next level shameless. In early 2024, he filed a $50 million lawsuit against his own dad. The lawsuit is a masterpiece of rewriting history. In it, Dan paints himself as the real victim of the story. He claims a poor figurehead was happening with the company's money. This from the man whose personal spending was the company's spending. The man who handed in receipts for a rock climbing wall now wants you to believe he knew nothing about the company's finances. It is the ultimate act of saving himself. After building a life and a career using his father's shady money and schemes, the second it was legally smart to do so, he threw him right under the bus. Dan Bilzerian's rise and fall is more than just a story about one man. It's a cautionary tale about the new type of celebrity he helped create, the bro culture king. He pioneered a brand of social media influence built entirely on opulence, machismo, and a complete lack of substance. His downfall serves as a powerful reminder to a generation of would-be followers that what they see on Instagram is almost never the full story. He showed us that a life of luxury and endless parties can be a performance, and that a curated image can be a trap. When the truth finally came out, the king of Instagram was left with one last product to sell, a final, sad fantasy to anyone foolish enough to still buy it. The king of Instagram was never a king. He was a character paid for by a scam company supported by hired models living in a rented castle. And now that the show is over, he's left with one last product to sell, a final, sad fantasy to anyone foolish enough to still buy it. So that's the complete story of Dan Bilzerian's collapse. And believe me, he is not the only scammer out here building an empire on lies. There are plenty more of these fake kings to cover. If you enjoy these deep dives and want to see who we expose next, this is your cue to hit that like button and subscribe so you don't miss a thing. Thanks for watching.